Good evening, and welcome to Kopernik Observatory. Great to see you all here this evening. My name is Drew Desker. I'm the director here at Kopernik, and you guys picked a great night to come here, especially after number one, because we have a great program, but number two, we're going to have an opportunity to do some decent night sky viewing, and and we've got just the scopes to make that happen. So, just a little bit of background. Well, actually, before that, just by show of hands, who's here either for the first time or not since a long time ago? Okay, like maybe your fourth grade field trip or something like that, right? So, it's great that you could join us here. Then let me see. By show of hands, who here is a member? Oh, okay, basically about the other half. All right. So the people that raise their hands second as a membership have actually a particularly valuable piece of information in that a Kopernik membership is actually, number one, it's very cost effective, but it's a great resource to you. It lets you get into Kopernik for any of our public programs and a number of the special programs. But also, we belong to what's called the ASTC, Association of Science and Technology Centers. And our membership card gets you into over 380 other science centers. So if you like this kind of place, you could go to Roberson for free. You could go to the Ithaca Science Center, the Museum of Science and Technology up in Syracuse, the Franklin Institute down in Philly, or the Intrepid down in New York City. And you get to skip the big long lines of people getting their tickets. The other piece that's particularly useful knowledge here is that like a family membership is only $75 for the year. I took my daughter down, just myself and my daughter, down to the Franklin Institute a few years ago, and had we paid street price, it would have been more than the whole membership. And that street price would have also only gotten us in for the one day. So plus we skipped the long line. So it's certainly worth investigating. Getting this, and again, you can use this around the country, but also there are a number of centers even around the world. The Corning glass is another use our membership. So we just celebrated our 50th anniversary. We have been we've been a public observatory and an informal STEM education center since we opened in 1974. And we had just an outstanding year last year. We had a big gala down at the Doubletree Hotel with Nobel Prize-winning chemist Stanley Whittingham as our guest speaker. And we ended up, now we're actually in the process of working toward what's the next 50 years going to look like. And we're about to make really sort of very public a capital campaign to expand the facility, to upgrade and update the technology that we have here. We just had a group of 70 students in here from third grade from Harpersville, I believe it was today, and the jaws dropped when they got to look through the scopes and worked with some of the robotics and did some magnetism work. So we're really an outstanding facility, and we're looking to make it even better. So we do, as I mentioned, we have these school groups that do come up. We also have a very extensive summer camp program. So if you know any younger students that are like going into second grade or up through high school, we have week-long STEM summer camps across a wide range of topics. The registration opened up actually less than a week ago, and we're over 1/3 full already. So. Now's the time to jump on that. The other thing we do is these Friday night programs, and I really, really enjoy these. I personally get a lot out of them. It's an opportunity for us to really expand what we know and sort of dive deeper into even stuff we do know. And not everything we do is on Friday nights is talking about astronomy. Tonight's. Well, you may cover a little bit of that, but in the past we've had somebody talk about the physics of music. Why does a violin, an oboe, and a trumpet all sound different playing the same note? We've had people from meteorologists from the National Weather Service that have come up and talked about just this past year. They talked about the 32 tornadoes that have been in New York State. And what we do now is we live stream all of our talks, and so that if you can't make it up here on a Friday evening, you can, from wherever you are, literally around the world, you could watch on our live stream. And even if you can't watch it live, you could actually, it's on our YouTube channel. In fact, actually, let me go over to this next line here. We have a YouTube channel here, and so last week's, it was Pi Day last week, March 14th, 3.14. So we had a game, a paradox, and the most irrational number. But along with our Friday night programs, we also do other programs on our live stream. Well, just a week and a half ago, or was it a week ago? No, it was a week ago. A week ago yesterday, or earlier today. That was that total lunar eclipse, and we had outstanding skies. And Jenny here, God bless her, did 6.5 hours or 7 hours worth of a live stream, and then ultimately, if you look down, there's she actually put together a 1 minute time lapse of the entire eclipse, looking through our scopes here. Then, as you go down here, we had black holes on Black Friday, but we also had people talk about bacterial biofilms, astronomy, mythology, and the keeping of time, another outstanding talk, and you'll be seeing that person very soon. Anyway, so it's worth checking out our YouTube channel. We have nearly 14,000 subscribers, and literally, again, people will be watching from literally around the world. Very often, we have Lindsay, who watches us from Adelaide, Australia. So everybody say hello to Lindsay. All right, there you go. She's having breakfast right now in Adelaide, but is watching our talk tonight. Again, these talks are an opportunity for us to continue our education. I keep saying I really wish I could live another 50 or 100 years. I'd love to see where technology, where medicine goes. Although there aren't any younger kids here today, but very often if there's a younger person in the audience, I'll say, when I was your age, I used to walk to the TV to change the channel. Now I could watch whatever I want on my phone. What's going to happen in the next 50 years? How is medicine going to improve? Will we finally get those flying cars that we've been trying to do? So anyway, it's an opportunity for us to dig deeper into topics, and tonight's presentation goes along those lines. We're very fortunate to have Binghamton University in the area, but I'm very fortunate to have Dr. Thomas O'Brien up here to speak, and Dr. O'Brien is actually on our board of directors, and he teaches science education at Binghamton University, but I'll let you give you your own bio there as you come up. So, Dr. O'Brien.
Not yet.
No, not yet. There we go.
Okay, I'm Tom. And welcome. Thanks for coming here. And Drew, can you cue up the... So as Drew mentioned, I'm a professor of science teacher education at Binghamton University. This is actually my last year. This is year 38. I'm retiring in just 2 months from now. So I can have more fun being at places like this. So we'll see if that works for you as well. So tonight's talk, just to frame it a little bit, who's speaking to you. So my first degree was chemistry with a minor in biology. I have been a student and a teacher in Catholic schools, Catholic universities, public universities. Been in and out of both my whole life. And I've never, from the time of my falling in love with science in middle school, I've never seen any conflict. That isn't to say that some people don't feel there is. But so you've probably already read the intro, the abstract there to come here. So there's probably at least one word that may be new to you, consilience. And we'll sort of hold off on what that means later. But I'm curious, the word evolution, everyone knows. What are some words that come to mind? Just single words, not definitions. If you say evolution, what comes to your mind? Please.
Darwin.
Darwin. So a guy. 1859. We'll talk a little bit about Darwin. What? Punctuated equilibrium. That's really cool. We're not going to talk about that today. Adaptation. When we think about human evolution, what do you think about? Genetics. Darwin proposed his theory of, which he did not call evolution actually initially, natural selection, before genetics was known. That a Catholic priest, a Catholic monk I should say, was working on genetics at that time. His work was largely undiscovered for like 40 years. So Darwin did his work without that. Anything else about humans strike you? Neanderthal. And the cool thing there is that they're not just brutes. Those of us that have Caucasian in us probably have some Neanderthal. Homo neanderthalis, actually, we know we're able to replicate with Homo sapiens. So in one sense, we could just displace them, but we actually have their genes, a small percentage of our genes in there. So what we're going to look at tonight is the sort of contentious, seemingly contentious relationship between these two fields of inquiry, science and religion, and with a particular focus on how that comes down to understanding human nature, both our better angels, as Lincoln would say, and our dark side, as any number of movies and books concentrate on. So originally this talk was scheduled right before Christmas. And so we are going to include a little bit of the Christmas spirit. Dickens published, Charles Dickens, we all know him from what's the Christmas story? The Christmas Carol. So eventually we're going to get to the Christmas Carol. But the interesting thing, he wrote a really fascinating book that has some of the most brilliant language that could have been written today. In 1859, the same year that Charles Darwin published his Origin of the Species, which incidentally didn't say the origin of species. He didn't say how non-life became life. Had no clue. And to this day, we don't have a great clue. So he says the best of times, the worst of times, the age of wisdom, the age of foolishness, an epoch of belief. It was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light, the season of darkness, the spring of hope, the winter of despair. With despair, all of these terms, particularly since COVID, have become in the newspaper all the time. And so I would argue that some understanding of both science and religion, in both cases at their best, would lead us to our better angels. And so that's sort of what we're going to try to get to. But very interesting, these two books were written just a few days, 2 weeks apart. Okay. I'm going to use 3 slides from the first talk. Was anyone here the first talk on science and religion? Okay. So the Reader's Digest version is going to be 3 slides. First of all, I have to explain what the word consilience means. It dates back to the ancient Greeks, although it was popularized by a biologist by the name of E.O. Wilson in a book by that title. But the idea is they believed that all knowledge is integrated in the same, that there are ultimate truths, and that we're all different disciplines and different people are approximating our way to it. But what I'm going to suggest is that around issues of good and evil, our dark side and our light side, so to speak, that there is a fair amount of consilience between what, and the frame we're going to use is largely Christian. This symbol here, of course, is not your classic Christian. What is that? The Taoism. And the neat thing here is the sense that things that are seeming opposites, in the Western mind, we're very keyed to black, white, right, wrong, this science, religion. That's not so much in Eastern philosophies, and particularly Taoism. And so the visual over on the side there, where is science and religion? Maybe they're all part of something bigger that connects. That link in these slides will be posted. The talk is posted. That's for the first talk. So if I don't bore you, if I intrigue you even a little bit, you may want to look at the first talk. What we did in the first talk is emphasize the connection between what science was called until about the 1850s was actually natural philosophy. And natural theology is a term that actually came somewhat later. So these things were not separated. And so Carl Sagan of Ithaca fame. Cosmos is a Greek word for the order of the universe. It is, in a way, the opposite of chaos. It implies the deep interconnectedness of all things. It conveys the awe for the intricate and subtle way in which the universe is put together. Well, natural theology, very heavy in the New Testament, is the use of the word logos, logic, reason, word. And so just in terms of the ideology of our language and cosmos, whole, oneness, unity, the word universe, uni out front. So that's the sort of story I'm going to try to tell. The so-called division is when we confuse what the goal is. So our sciences were found at the first talk focused on all the early folks, Copernicus, Galileo, Newton, and they were all deeply religious. Newton actually spent more time on theology than he did on physics. He did more time on alchemy, the foundation of chemistry, than he did on physics. So in the first talk, we sort of covered all that. But for now, just the two books. So the book of Scripture, which is not designed to tell us, as to paraphrase Galileo, who was paraphrasing a pope, science is not designed to tell us how to get to heaven. It's designed to tell us how the heavens go, so to speak. And so the Scripture book of theology explains the spiritual reality, or what is often termed the supranatural. Supranatural includes the natural, but goes beyond it, if it exists. And from a scientific point of view, and we'll talk later about agnosticism, methodologically, scientists are agnostic. Science deals with measurable and manipulable. I couldn't fit the word manipulable on there. Measurable and manipulable. Matter and energy. By definition, I can't do an experiment. Now I'm going to weigh God. And now I'm going to put God to the test. That's sort of the antithesis of everything that we know theologians or Christians or any people of faith would talk about. So we talked about that in the first talk. Let me have you do something. If a couple people can just pass those around. And if you pass those around. So this notion of what science is about, which actually connects a little bit with what religion is about. We can start those back there. I'd like you to look at this, the side that's up here. So what science is about, or natural philosophy, is finding the order in seeming chaos. Now, our brain is wired to see patterns even if they're not really there. So if we look at what astrology did, the different stories in the heavens, different cultures have different constellations. The stars are the same, but what they chose to emphasize and see. As a kid, you may have enjoyed, I recommend it as an adult, is moving clouds. Take some time just to chill, lay down, and look at it, and you can make clouds move. Of course, the wind is moving them, but they can take on different forms. That's your mind largely imposing patterns on what isn't arguably a pattern. But we believe there are patterns in nature. So this one here, rotating one's perspective right. So if you hold it and rotate it right. So again, look at this side. The back side is a much more complicated pattern. And then if you angle it a little bit away from you, somebody have a spare one here? So what I'm doing is I'm holding it in such a way that hands-on exploration is on my right, so on your right. And I'm looking down the paper, 45-degree angle. Can someone tell me what you see? Look at science from a different angle. So you might wonder what this box is going to have to do anything. We're going to get to that. But just as a visual metaphor, I want you to think outside of the box of the way you maybe previously thought what science was about and maybe what you previously thought religion was about. We're going to do a whole lot more with that later. We're going to only very lightly touch on this whole chimp thing. It turns out the outrageous thing is not, oh, we're related to chimps. No, we're related to bacteria. As a chemist, most of the major chemistry that every living organism does was figured out by bacteria. That you need to be at least like 500 power to see the big ones. So thinking outside the box a little bit. So Judeo-Christian background, biblical stuff. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. If we shift over to the New Testament, in the beginning was the Logos, the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Da-da-da-da-da. All of this happened a long time. If we say that the scientific revolution started around with Copernicus, this was done thousands of years before that. The Old Testament, the New Testament, good 1,500 years. So the question is this pre-scientific religious story, is that opposed to the scientific evolutionary explanation? And most people think evolution and they think biology. We're going to get there, but that's not where it started. So evolution started, and the Christians and scientists think absolutely the same way. There was a time not only where there was no matter and energy, there was no time and there was no space, which is something that's rather hard to conceive of. Those things all go together. So in the beginning, that's in the beginning of the physical universe. And then the question is, well, how did that come? Well, from a Christian perspective, it was created from nothing. From the scientific perspective, there was no matter. There was no thing around at that time. So in that sense, at least, there is some consilience. Both are saying something very similar. We have different explanations because science stops at that point because there were no rules of physics. Once you had something and you had this Big Bang phenomena, some 13.77 billion years ago, and we have to figure out what a billion is. We'll do that shortly. Then you got physics. And the interesting thing is that that Big Bang theory was actually developed by a Catholic priest who happened to be a really good physicist and was able to use Einsteinian physics and mathematics to his idea. The word that he used originally was a cosmic egg. And one of the chief astronomers at the time, very well-known man, Fred Hoyle, initially thought this is just a stupid idea. So I'm going to call it the Big Bang. And then all the math and Einsteinian physics turned out that's the standard model. That's what we think. So there is some consilience there. And so as a priest, he saw no contrast, that the highest activity of a human being is searching for truth, to grasp truth in all of its forms. Truth is an approximation, always, if we're human. So evolutionary thinking is against a biblical young earth. And we'll deal with math a little bit. But from Augustine on, Christian theologians had no issue around that. People, when 2 popes back, the big deal was made, oh, he made a statement about evolution. We'll show you, it was clear in the 1860s, the Catholic Church had no opposition to evolution. The majority of Christians did not. And even now, the fundamental stuff is mainly an American phenomena. It's not a worldwide thing. So the division. So what we do have that needs an explanation is that people tend to make a misconception that because scientists don't talk about God. Now, all those early people we talked about in the first presentation did. If you read their writings, and as a high school student, I had the pleasure of reading Galileo and Boyle and Newton, translated into English, thankfully, not Latin, but in their own words. They actually dropped God into their whole conversation. But by the time Darwin came around, 1830s, 1840s, 1850s, it became very clear that we had to set that conversation aside. So individual scientists may be believers. The man who gave us electric generators was a devout Christian, so much so that when he made the generator, which is also called an electric motor, depending on which way you run the energy in or out, he did not patent it. Now think of the opposite of Edison. He patented everything. The man that made all these lights possible, including the light bulb, didn't patent it because his Christian belief was he was discovering the handprint of God for the benefit of humans. So again, no. But Darwin's good friend, called Darwin's bulldog, because he was a much better lecturer than Darwin and much better public proponent of evolution theory, coined the term agnosticism. People confuse that with atheism. Science is methodologically agnostic. So when I do experiments as a chemist, and I had the pleasure as a fairly young man to make a new chemical compound that never existed on the planet. Sort of cool for a 19-year-old to do. nowhere in that research or the write-up did I say, now, this happened because God. That's not, you don't pull God out of the hat, because when you do, then can you keep asking questions that you can measure and manipulate? No, God did, okay. So individual people may believe in God, they may be agnostic about God, or they may be atheistic. Science methodologically is agnostic, which is very different than atheistic. And this notion that maybe there's two realms that are somewhat separate, but maybe they overlap, was captured in artwork like this in 1888, again, circa the time that evolutionary theory was becoming stronger. This probably brings back bad. How many people took high school chemistry? You're probably not smiling now when you look at this. But this here is the equivalent of an entire encyclopedia. This is how you build a universe. Sadly, the way it was presented to you was probably not very good, and I'm not going to do much with it tonight other than to say, you are stardust. So I grew up in the 60s, high school in the 70s. So the songs, you are stardust. Yes, you are. But where it started is actually around the time of that Big Bang, the notion of quark gluon plasma. And then at some point, we had the subatomic particles that you memorized, protons, neutrons, electrons. All matter is made up of three things that are different than each other, but all matter comes down to those three particles. But what happened then in stellar explosions, so a sun died for you from a science perspective, not the son of God, a sun, a star, you are the result of stellar explosions. And when you explode stars, the two simplest elements, which make up most of the matter in the universe, hydrogen and helium, were able to build other elements, all the way up to roughly 100 that are known. Those are cool, though, and that's synergy then, because we get totally new properties. Each of these elements has totally unique properties, even though they're all made up of protons, neutrons, and electrons. Then they start forming compounds, and you get millions. And you get things like hydrogen gas, highly flammable, explosive. Oxygen helps things burn. Put them in the air, you make water, you put out fires. Sodium metal, you can watch it melt, rust in your hand. Explodes in water. Combined with chlorine gas the Germans used in World War I to kill people, first chemical warfare, you get sodium chloride, which is an essential part of your diet. We have too much of it, but it's an essential part of our diet. So the whole story there is a story of synergy and emergent properties. Because now I want to shift to biology. So we have this big universe of all these different things, and chemists brought it down to there's only 100 different things and 3 basic particles. That's pretty cool. Well, biology, by the 14th to the 1600s, we were finding all these new animals everywhere. We were finding things like in Australia, platypuses. For years, people thought that was a hoax, that somebody put different parts of different organisms together. We also started finding fossils, that is, weird things that we didn't have anything like it. Our president, Thomas Jefferson, was really interested in fossils. And about a half an hour from my home, Big Bone State, now a state park, wasn't a state park when I was a kid, they found mastodons, and they found all kinds of stuff that, so the biologists now have a problem. The same problem chemists have. You have this diversity. Look at all the colors and shapes and textures. Biologists, which is not only do we have all these organisms here, we keep finding new ones, and that's even before we start looking microscopically. But now we got these really strange creatures that clearly aren't around anymore. So where's the cosmos in this seeming chaos? We have all this diversity. Where's the unity? And that's the question, ultimately, that this guy tried to figure out. So he wasn't dean for med school. He tried that for a clergy, tried that, learned a lot of geology, and wound up on a ship to travel for a number of years as a companion. He was a naturalist. He was a companion to an educated companion to the captain. He spent years, he actually sat on his work, much longer than he probably should have before he eventually published it. But his phrasing, there's a grandeur in this view of life, with its several powers having been originally breathed into few forms or into one. from so simple a beginning, endless forms, most beautiful and most wonderful, have been and are being evolved. So this, with these several powers and having life breathed into them, that's almost like a biblical kind of language that he used. And in this original edition, it went through 6. He did not use the word evolution, and he didn't use survival of the fittest. Those came in the 5th and 6th editions. So he didn't even use those terms. And what he didn't talk about, the origin of species, so how did life begin? He said nothing about that, other than this nice flowering phrase, because they didn't understand, they had no knowledge of genetics, they had no knowledge of cell biology. So how life began, and even now, so how do you get, Pasteur showed that new life never comes from non-life. Classic experiments. It had to happen at least once. And even if you say, well, life came here from another planet, well, then take that back. You know, that's a progressive non-answer. So Darwin, real quick, a lesson on what he talked about. And what he talked about, this 2 things. One is that in nature, when you look at most organisms, how many of you have kids of your own? Are they clones of each other? The purpose for sex, from a biology point of view, not religion, not humanistic, is sex scrambles the cards. So you can have, we have 3 children. They're very different in many ways, thankfully. None of them are clones of me. They may be more like my wife. They're all good musicians. But other than that, sex shuffles things up and creates diversity. That was a great invention, and we'll get to that later. But the simple idea is that, and here it's shown with sexual creatures, if we have some butterflies that can mate with each other, they produce offspring. Some of the offspring here look sort of like wood, and some look different. If you look like wood, you have natural camouflage. You're not going to get eaten as much. The ones that look different get eaten more. And so competition, we wind up with a whole lot more of the ones that don't get eaten. Now that explains how species within species evolve over time. The question of how you get from one species to another species, that's a bit more challenging. Couple things quick from a slide. It has lots of information I'm not going to say. But so religious opposition. The religious opposition at the time was only by a small percentage of people then, in some sense probably smaller than now, who believed in the 7-day, 24-hour days. Darwin knew he needed at least a couple 100 million years for this process, this slow process to play out. And people that believe in 7-day Earth, well, that doesn't quite work. And then there was a British bishop in 1650, by using the genealogy, if you read the Bible, he begat him, begat him, begat him. And you say, well, how long did they live? And well, then they lived longer. So I don't know what number he used, if he used 125 or something. But they figured out the Earth maybe dated back to 4000 BC. If you believe that, evolution is if you believe that as an element of faith, evolutionary science is completely opposed to your faith. There's no mincing words about that. What we're going to use this for in a little bit is to figure out what a million is and what a billion is. Because most people, and if we think about our economy, when you get into trillions, millions don't count. Billions and trillions count. Most people have no concept of what that is operationally, so we'll try to do that. There was a whole lot more scientific opposition. The fossil evidence was very loose. Not knowing genetics, because sadly Darwin didn't know about the work that Mendel did. He didn't have a mechanism for how traits got passed on, and most people thought, well, they'd be diluted anyhow. So you'd never be building up something like more brown color. People that said, and there's a few people still argue this, that you couldn't get a complex organism like the eye by random mutations, which we now speak genetically, and sexual reproduction. You couldn't get something complex, and anything short of the complete eye that I have would be dysfunctional. That's not true. If you just sense light over somebody that doesn't sense light, that's a big advantage. And then the one I want to spend time on, some people thought you didn't do a controlled experiment. We can do controlled experiments now. We normally think of evolution taking millions of years. The COVID virus and bacteria can evolve. Bacteria can reproduce like every 40 minutes. So think in 100, if my mom's 96, if you live 100 years, how many generations of bacteria? Bacteria and viruses and insects that reproduce fast, actually, we can do experiments and they evolve in real time. One of the things we're doing, and there's some question still what the origin of COVID is, but those people that think it came from virology lab in Wuhan, China, not just from animal infection, we are doing experiments where we are evolving organisms for biowarfare and other purposes. So we do evolution in real time now. That wasn't possible then. But the biggest one, and this is the one I want to focus on most today, is this notion of time. Because the biggest critic of Darwin was the top physicist in the world, the Einstein of his day, so much that he was knighted and called Lord Kelvin. His name was William Thomson. Brilliant. And he said, based on what they knew at the time, that the Earth at most was 30 million years. And Darwin said, that's at least an order of magnitude off of what I need. Fortunately, a physicist said, based on what we now know, unless there's some unknown source of internal energy, that was later discovered around 1900. It's called radioactivity. Our Earth is warmer than it should be because it's been producing radioactive heat that continues to heat the planet from the inside. So the fundamentalists, they believe in a young Earth. Not far from my home in Kentucky, where I grew up, they built an ark. And you can go in there and you can find out how dinosaurs, sort of Fred Flintstone, how dinosaurs and humans walk the Earth at the same time. Science is completely, if that is your faith, that is contradictory to math and physics and chemistry, not just biology, science is in opposition to that. There isn't compromising between 10,000 years and billions of years. That would be a huge percentage error. But also, in addition to the fact that we do know the Earth is about 4.5 billion years old, so that the time thing is not an issue. The issue that somehow, so we're going to talk both about the numbers here. We're going to talk about the fact that some people think that evolution just means we're all brute beast, and what evolution says is survival of the fittest, and we should just kill all those races, not just other species, but races that are subhuman. We've done this experiment in the last 100 years, multiple times. Evolution doesn't say that at all. So there's the moral tree, the creationist evolutionary tree. So anything you don't like about society, whether you don't like homosexuality, you don't like taxes, you don't like schools, you don't like crime. At one point or another, anything that people don't like has been put on this tree, which dates, fundamentalists in our country were in 1910, 1920, 1930s, and it never went away. But this is part of it. And truly, if you believe that evolution caused everything that's bad, then you'd want to chop down this horrible tree. I'd like to present an alternative view of that. So the real crazy thing is not that we're related to chimps. And it's not that we came from chimps, because then the question is, how did they still survive? We have an ancestor that goes back further than chimps. But if we go all the way back, the common ancestor, called the last universal common ancestor, was a bacteria. So what's much more, if you want to have, if your faith is tied to, well, humans are totally unique, you shouldn't focus on chimps. You should focus on, they're saying we came from bacteria. Yes, that's absolutely true. And I think that's a marvelous thing. And so we're going to come back to that as well. So let's deal with this. So the box. So we're talking millions and billions. Exponential, that's 10 to the 6th and 10 to the 9th. So how do we get there? So this is the basic unit of volume in the metric system. So the metric system was developed, led by French chemist Lavoisier at the time of the American Revolution. In the French Revolution, they chopped his head off. On anybody's list of the top 5 chemists in the world, and his head went rolling. But before he died, was part of a commission that came up with the metric system. When I was in 7th grade, 1969, the book said our country was going to convert to the metric any day. The so-called English system, which was invented by the British, they had already given it up. Here we still are. So in any case, the metric system's cool. What's wrong with this is a basic unit of volume. It's big, yeah. Do you buy milk in that? No. So it turns out we want to come down in size. So the down in size is this. So does anyone know what this volume is called? The liter, which we really should call it a cubic decimeter. When we use the words milliliters and liters, people forget that all volume is a cubic volume. So this is really a cubic decimeter. And if we look at this, these rods are a meter long. We could put 10 of them this way, we could put 10 of them that way, and we could put 10 of them this way. So if I had enough, it would take way longer than we have time for, and I filled this box, how many of these boxes would fit in there? 1,000. 10 times 10 times 10 is 10 cubed. So that gets us 1,000. That's sort of the number that the New Earth, Young Earth creationists want to give you. Science paints a far more interesting picture because we have a tenth of that. A decimeter is 1/10 of a meter. A tenth of a tenth is 100. This is a centimeter. So if I place these, how many of these centimeters would fit all the way across a meter? 100 down and the other way. Now this really gets impossible, but if I start filling this whole box with these little cubes, which is smaller than a sugar cube, how many do I have? 1,000,000, 10 to the 6th. So following that math, so we could put 1,000,000 of these things in here across, but evolutionary time, short of bacteria viruses, we're often talking about billions of years. It turns out, what's the next step down from that? A millimeter. So a millimeter is how many of those would fit across? 1,000, 1,000, 1,000. 1,000 cubed is 10 to the 9th. So you now have, and it turns out we won't take the time now for sure, but if you just go home and put a table salt in your hand, if you have a little hand lens and look at it, they're perfect little cubes. Cosmos. You think manufacturing processes? No. Crystals, sodium chloride is a cubic structure. It turns out that's the closest thing in nature I've found. It's not exactly, but it's damn close. So if we had that, and so your water bill, when you get it, has, if you own a home, has concentration of pollutants in parts per million and parts per billion. So 1 part per million would be if in this volume you had one of these. A part per billion would be 1 crystal of salt in that. Now to set the context, so if we took these billions individual salt crystals and we put them in a line, it'd be 620 miles long. So any pictures you've ever seen in books that show evolutionary timelines, they lie. Most pictures in science books lie at the awesome reality of nature when it comes to powers of 10 scale. They just flat out lie. In most cases, they don't tell you that you're lying. And there's a few cases where they lie and they don't have to. A picture's worth 1,000 words, only if it's an accurate picture, or you have disclaimers on it. And science books are horrible at that. So to understand this deep time perspective, we need that. How are we doing? What time is it? Nat, you have time? Okay. Real quick. So all of the sciences deal with different scales. The scale of the universe in terms of size, from the smallest to the largest, is 10 to the 42nd. When I was a junior in high school chemistry, 1973, there was a powerful book and a movie made. You can still find it online free, called Powers of 10. It blew my mind as a 16-year-old. And it's still available and logical. So the different sciences deal with the different scales of things. But evolution, again, is not just biological evolution. It's the evolution of all matter. You are stardust. So where science and religion agree. The physical universe is not eternal. There was a beginning. The creation of the universe, the earth, and all the life forms took place over a period of time. Now, not this. Day 1, 24-hour day. And how can you have days before you have the sun and the earth rotating around it and the moon, it's meaningless to talk about days before you have all that structure, and we didn't have that structure for a long time. Where we disagree, again, is this time frame. But again, that's a very small percentage of Christians ever, and largely unique to America. The fundamentalist movement is not nearly as big in Europe as here. Only one quote I'm going to read you. So in 1868, so this is like 9 years after Darwin publishes, the man who was a priest at the time, Episcopalian, converted into Catholicism. We made him a cardinal eventually. Then we made him a saint. I say we, I'm a Catholic. Had this to say in 1868, as to the divine design, it is not an instance of incomprehensibility and infinitely marvelous wisdom and design have given certain laws to matter millions of years ago, which have surely and precisely worked out at the long course of these ages those effects which he first proposed. Mr. Darwin's theory need not be atheistic. It be true or not, it may simply be suggesting a larger idea of divine providence and skill. Everything I've learned about chemistry and physics and biology and math has only expanded my view. I have a much bigger conception of God than I had before I knew these things. I could be agnostic if I hadn't had those experiences and other things. I would have a very hard time being atheistic, because atheistic is a religion without a God, and it's sort of silly. If you're going to have a religion, you might as well have a good story. And atheist is, and it can never be scientific, because you're stating something that cannot be proven in the lab. And again, individual scientists, anybody can be atheist. That's a philosophy, and that's fine. It's not science, though. Agnosticism is the methodology of science. Okay, let's see. I think I was going to show that, but I think I'll not. So life. So we're related to bacteria. So the big story with life was, and we believe there's various theories about where it may have started, but the one thing it had to have is bubbles. It had to have membranes. And it turns out soap bubbles are an incredibly good model for the cell membrane. You probably memorized somewhere in high school biology or middle school, endoplasmic reticulum and all these fancy terms. If you only remembered one thing, the cell membrane, you would have the most important thing. Because the cell membrane, inside, outside the box, if you're going to be something that's alive, you're not the same as what's outside the box, but you have to have a box. So you have to have a cell membrane. And in the case of bacteria, they have a cell membrane and a cell wall, which plants have both as well. So, and it turns out at the earliest stage there was cooperation, because inside of every cell in your body, depending on the type of cell, you have somewhere between hundreds and as many as 10,000 little things called, and called mitochondria. And so at the core of life, so bacteria went along for a very long time just being bacteria. And any changes in bacteria largely happen by mutation. Most mutations don't work. Every now and then you get a good mutation. And when you're dividing every 40 minutes and you have billions of years, you got a lot of time to accumulate things that work. That's bacteria. But you limit it really small in size, because you have to get waste out of this thing, and you got to get food and oxygen in if you're an aerobic bacteria. And it turns out bacteria have to be really, because if they get bigger, one of two things. They starve or they self-pollute. What did nature do? It did cooperation from the very beginning of life forms that we know. Eukaryotic cells, so this is real easy to do, but I'm not going to take the time right now. Blow a soap bubble and then stick a straw in it, and you can blow a bubble inside of a bubble. That's what bacteria did, because now we have not just all this surface area to do chemistry, but we have the surface area of the inside. And all the pictures show it wrong, because the mitochondria, like a muscle cell, can have 10,000 of these. And the pictures you've seen in books show it like, well, it might have 10,000. It turns out we absolutely believe Carl Sagan's first wife, I think, and she was derided, female, what did she know? Endosymbiotic theory. She said that all living cells that are eukaryotes, and they can get bigger cells, like you cells, you and me cells, figured out how to do this. And so what happened then was rather than one cell eating another cell, it went inside and it wasn't destroyed. And over time, it specialized as the energy producer. And then similarly, some cells that united with cyanobacteria, used to be called blue-green bacteria, are photosynthetic. And so the ancestors of a plant cell not only had mitochondria, and the books typically don't show you that. They say, well, plants have chloroplasts and animals have mitochondria. They both have mitochondria. Plants don't exist just for you and I. They don't produce sugar and oxygen just for us. They produce it for themselves. They're just very abundant. So both of the major strands of animals and plants, to this day, every cell in your body exists because there's this cooperation. It's not survival of the fittest, I eat you, dog eat dog world. It's every cell in your body is screaming cooperation. And of course, the rest of your cell has all their kind of parts that cooperate as well. But this literally was a separate life form. Okay. So rather than biology just being about survival of the fittest in a dog eat dog world, it's actually, there's a wonderful book called Survival of the Friendliest. And this is really close to home in the sense of humans. Humans are potentially the most cooperative species. We weren't the strongest, we weren't the fastest, so how did we bring down and actually drive to extinction the mastodons? Because we banded together. How did we survive the cold, tens of thousands of years of frigid? Because we cooperate with each other. So evolution is, half of the story is competition, if that. Mainly the story of evolution, you walk outside, trees communicate with each other. Humans ought to be able to communicate as well as trees do. Okay. What we know about the selfish gene, Richard Dawkins, you've probably heard of, wrote this very famous book, and people misconstrued it, partly because of his lectures, that fundamentally all life is selfish. And again, totally did not, first of all, he didn't mean it quite that way, but it got translated that way. So-called selfish genes that know how to survive can actually contribute to altruism. But Richard Dawkins made the fundamentalist and the Richard Dawkins of the world made a fortune by taking these two extreme positions, neither of which are scientific. Atheism is not science. Agnosticism is science. They're two different things. But he actually said the universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is at bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. What philosophical arrogance. Science doesn't say that. And in fact, the top mathematician at the turn of the century actually said scientists animated by the purpose of proving that they are purposeless constitute an interesting subject for study. Think about that. So purpose is what drives humans. But we do have this other ugly thing we got to talk about in terms of the dark side. So Darwin himself didn't coin the phrase survival of the fittest. He didn't use it until the 5th edition of his book. But it was coined. And this philosopher, Herbert Spencer. But along with that came, and we're going to get to Dickens shortly here, came this notion of that, obviously all those poor people and all those people that don't look like us, that don't have the right color of skin, they're an inferior race. Therefore, they're sapping our resources. One can think the current culture and how much of this is still part of the mindset. So Herbert Spencer sort of propagated this, and eventually Darwin started using the term, which was unfortunate because it gave overemphasis to the competition, and Darwin also wrote and talked about the cooperation. But so Scrooge, you all know the story of Scrooge. And a brilliant line, again, this was a few years before Origin of the Species, but these gentlemen that are collecting money for the poor at Christmas time are saying, surely it's more than usually desirable at this time of the year that we should make some slight provision for the poor. I mean, think of the arrogance of a slight provision for the poor. Wow, we're there again. And destitute, who suffer greatly at present time. And the pre-ghost visited Scrooge is not having it. He said, I can't afford to make idle people merry. They just want to eat. No, I'm going to make them marry. If they would rather die, they had better do it and decrease the surplus population. So unfortunately, evolution theory has been linked with social Darwinism, which Darwin did not promote. So it's sort of a lie. He did write some other books called The Descent of Man. The first book, he didn't talk a lot about men. And he did cross into some areas that both some good stuff, and he was slightly racist, as were most people of the day. So it was sort of a mixed bag, but he did study and realize that we are related to chimps. And then the sense was, well, are those people that have darker skin, are they closer to being chimps? So all kind of ridiculous stuff came about. But his book largely is a well-written, reasoned book. You have to read it in the context of the 1870s. Obviously, his view on women and other things weren't as informed as they could be. But his cousin, though, went to the dark side. His cousin, who was a polymath, brilliant man, invented much of what we call statistics, actually. But he actually went so far to coin a phrase called eugenics. And the Nazis loved that. So survival of the fittest, so evolutionary theory, which Darwin didn't even use that term, got linked with Nazism. And so some of this, Darwin totally disagreed with this. But again, this is sort of Scrooge. So we need to have, and think Victorian England and other times where we have to have selective breeding, and you don't want to dilute your race by marrying across, just all kinds of crazy stuff. That has long since been put to rest, although some people are still propagating it. And some people are using it as to argue against evolutionary theory. So we have about 10 minutes, Drew? Oh, whatever. No, I shouldn't. I should preface this by saying I teach 3-hour classes. No.
Our board meeting starts tomorrow at 9.
Oh, yeah, we got to get out to see the stars. But so Darwin, his second last book, his last book, he studied earthworms as a marvelous creature that transformed our planet. But his second last book was Expression of Emotions. And this book is really rich with a lot of things. But his argument was we need to learn about human emotions because that'll change the course of human history if we actually understand and get to propagate the best human emotions versus the worst. And that's a task that the ancient Greeks, the Stoics in particular, were very, very interested in. So there's overlap there. I don't know if you can see both words up at the top there, good and evil. So that's humans, long history. We actually have, our brain got layered on. So you have, in a very crude way of saying it, your brainstem is like a reptile's brain. They don't think in the sense that we use the term think. Mammals added in emotional connections. So mammals, by nature, take care of their offspring. And typically, they start forming social groups. And that was made very dominant in the ape family and then in humans. And we added in oral language, which makes it possible. We just don't have to read expressions. We actually can listen to what people say and how they say it. Being good. Reciprocal altruism. I scratch your back, you scratch mine. I help you, you help me. The cool thing that happens in humans, though, if a third disinterested party is watching and they see that I help you, and if you were watching, you would be inclined to trust me. So we have trust in each other ahead of time. That's what's called pro-social cooperation or paying it forward. A really cool video that I had no intention of showing, but if you just Google kindness boomerang or life vest inside, really, really fun 5-minute video that features, in the book features this notion of how humans at our best, we work best when we cooperate. And anything substantial that you've probably done in your life has not been a solo venture. Getting my dissertation, I wrote the whole thing. Was it a solo venture? Hell no. You know, my 38 years at BU, I've had 4.8 million grants. Every one of them I had at least one collaborator on. I haven't done anything in my life completely solo. I've written books by myself, but those are based on work I did with other people and lessons I learned by being a student of somebody. So humans at our best cooperate. Religious side of it, every major religion has the golden rule. And Christianity, so in everything do to others what you would have them do to you. Taoism, regard your neighbor's gain as your own gain, and your neighbor's loss as your own loss. Goodness gracious. Should we put that on the dollar bill? These are ancient wisdoms that currently our culture is not taking very seriously. And not just our culture, the world. We have the capability, we can't wipe out all life. Bacteria will always survive, and probably cockroaches. But higher life forms, we have full capability, and we're not going to transport the human race to Mars. Elon Musk wants to go. He could go. He can go. We're not going to transport any number of humans that far off. So this social evolutionary psychology about pro-social behavior, that we're at our best. There's one of my favorite prayers is the prayer of St. Francis of Assisi. And one of the lines, it is in giving we receive. I tell my students as recent as last night, I have always felt since age 18, and I've been teaching, I'm 68, 50 years, most of that time I have been paid to learn. How cool is that? Paid to learn. So I obviously tried to teach people something, but I got something back in the process. Any presentation I do, this is the first time I've ever done this, I wind up learning some things and making some connections that I had previously not made. So that's what pro-social behavior is about. Scientists study, and if you want to Google, even Wikipedia, if you look up values in action, scientists have taken the 4 classic Greek, particularly Stoic, virtues of wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance, and broken them down and study these analytically. So scientists, evolutionary social psychologists are studying values and actions. And if you look, there's some words there that look a whole lot like Christianity. The 2 that they added, and this is science, is humanity, love, kindness, and social intelligence, and on transcendence, the appreciation of beauty and excellence. If people don't get a sense of awe, and that's part of what Kopernik is about. So shortly you'll have the chance to go be awed with nature. That's science. And I would say that's faith. Gratitude, hope, humor, and spirituality is the word that's used in the science context. They don't use religion. They use the word spirituality. The dark side, though, and again, think of our world. The classic 7 deadly sins from the Christian tradition are envy, wrath, greed, gluttony, sloth, lust, and pride. Think of our world. Gandhi, who helped free India, talked about social sins, knowledge without character, science without humanity, politics without principles, wealth without work, commerce without morality, pleasure without conscience, and religion without sacrifice. Again, I submit that evolutionary social psychology and religious faith, a variety, not just Christian, have a whole lot to say that's in common that we really need to start using. One of my favorite books I used to read to kids and use in teaching science, the Lorax at the end, unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's just not. Hate has 4 letters, but so does love. Enemy has 7 letters, but so does friends, and so forth. 2 quotes I would like to read. Jimi Hendrix, when the guitarist, when the power of love overcomes the love of power, the world will know peace. We can look at Africa, Ukraine, our country. Wow. Wow. Martin Luther King, power without love is reckless and abusive. Love without power is sentimental and anemic. So if we connect power, the power of technology, and say love is about religion, I think it cuts both ways. But if we make it simply that way, we need both. Power is at its best, love implementing the demands of justice. And justice at its best is power correcting everything that stands against love. And then let's wind it up here in the next 2 minutes. Scrooge. Of course, the 3 ghosts came to him, and by the end, the author says, he became as good a friend, as good a master, as good a man as the good old city knew, or any other good old city, town, or borough in the good old world. And I think if we do better with science and religion, that both of them should expand our mind, even if the only thing you learned tonight, that a million and a billion you can actually imagine. And so if you think of 3.8 billion years of evolution of life. And 1 billion years is a crystal, 620 miles of crystals. Wow. That is evolution. And there's the Christian song, "Our God is an awesome God." If there's a God, which I thoroughly believe there is, he's an awesome God. He's not 7 days, 24-hour days. No, this is really more interesting. Another thing you might want to Google is the positive pledge. And I won't take the time to read that. So let's see here. I think we're about, oh, and you can't do Christmas. Again, this was designed for Christmas. Without talking, It's a Wonderful Life. And Clarence, who gets his wings, so he saves the despondent George, who's just a lovely man, who's the ultimate pro-social guy, and a mistake happens, and he feels he's ruined, and he wants to die. And so he's going to jump in, and Clarence sees him, and the only way he knows to save him is because George is so pro-social, so caring, George will jump in to save the angel. And so he gets his wings, and Clarence, when they're drying off, says, "Strange, isn't it? Each man's life touches so many other lives. When he isn't around, it leaves an awful hole." So all of us would leave an awful hole if we're not here trying to be a special somebody to someone else. So I think, let's see here. Yeah, we'll skip that. That's a second puzzle that's there that you can play with. But I'll take a break and call it done unless you have questions. So thank you.
Dr. Bryan, Tom, thank you so much for this great presentation. Are there any questions? All right, you've answered them in advance. So
they're in a state of just numbness. Like, I just watched a webinar, and I was just talking to Art, a friend. I ran it in 1.75 speed, so I may have done that to you, and I apologize. But if you just get a couple of the ideas, it's worth it. Again, there's a puzzle on the back side that's a more complicated version of what's on the front side, and you may need a neighbor to help you on that. So with that, there be stars.
There are stars, but I do want to say that we have another Friday night program next Friday. Actually, the presenter is here this evening. We won't out him yet. The topic is called Venus and Lucifer, Astronomy, Mythology, and the Keeping of Time. So definitely want to come back and check that out. But tonight, again, we've got a great night. Jupiter and Mars are for sure out. We'll work on getting the Andromeda Galaxy going for you, and who knows what else we can find out there. So thanks again, Dr. O'Brien. Appreciate it. And
way more money, and it would help us support the programs we do.
All right. Well, thanks again, and we'll look forward to seeing you outside and again.